There's a name that echoes down through the centuries, a name inextricably linked with treason, fire, and the explosive overthrow of order. It is a name celebrated, paradoxically, with the very element he sought to master: gunpowder. Every 5th of November, across the towns and villages of Britain, effigies are burned, fireworks scream into the night sky, and children are taught a simple rhyme about a plot that never was. The name is Guy Fawkes, but the man we celebrate, the straw-stuffed figure we toss onto the bonfire, is a caricature, a pantomime villain designed to comfort us with the illusion of a threat safely vanquished. The real story, the story of the man himself, is far darker, more complex, and infinitely more tragic. It is not a tale of a one-dimensional monster, but of a devout, hardened soldier forged in the crucible of religious war, a man whose unshakable conviction led him into the cold, damp darkness of a cellar beneath Parliament, and then into the even greater darkness of the Tower of London's torture chamber. This is the story of how a man of faith and principle was systematically dismantled, his body broken and his will crushed, until all that remained was a signature, a jagged, spidery scrawl that stands as a testament to the absolute power of the state to unmake a man. We must peel back the layers of nursery rhyme and festival to find a flesh and blood figure at the heart of the conspiracy, to understand the forces that drove him, and to witness the true, horrifying cost of his failure. Guy Fawkes was born in York in April of 1570, into an England torn apart by a schism of the soul. The nation was officially and aggressively Protestant under Queen Elizabeth I, but the old faith Catholicism clung on with fierce tenacity in the northern counties. His own family was a microcosm of this division. His father, Edward Fawkes, was a proctor and advocate in the ecclesiastical courts of the Archbishop of York, a man embedded within the very machinery of the Protestant establishment. His maternal grandparents, however, were recusant Catholics, those who refused to attend Anglican services and clung to the Roman rite in secret at great personal risk. Young Guy was baptized in the Protestant Church of St. Michael le Belfry, yet the currents of the forbidden faith ran deep in his bloodline. The defining rupture of his childhood came not from a theological debate, but from a simple finality of death. When Guy was 8 years old, his father died. His mother, Edith, eventually remarried, and her choice of new husband would set the course for the rest of her son's life. His stepfather was Dinas Bainbrig, a member of a prominent Catholic family from Scotland, a man who lived his faith not as a quiet compromise, but as an open act of defiance against the crown. To be a Catholic in Elizabethan England was to live a life under siege. It was a world of priest holes, of secret masses whispered in secluded manor houses, of constant surveillance by government spies. The law demanded conformity. The Act of Uniformity made attendance at Anglican services compulsory. To refuse was to be branded a recusant and subjected to crippling fines, confiscation of property, and imprisonment. To be a Catholic priest, or to harbor one, was an act of high treason, punishable by the most barbaric death the state could devise: hanging, drawing, and quartering. This was the atmosphere in which Guy Fawkes came of age. He saw firsthand the courage and the suffering of his Catholic neighbors. He would have heard stories of missionaries like Edmund Campion hunted down and executed with performative cruelty, their trials a spectacle of state power. This environment did not breed moderation, it forged zealots. The daily reality of persecution, combined with the influence of his devout stepfather, transformed the quiet boy from York into a man of intense, unbending religious conviction. He saw the Protestant regime not as a legitimate government, but as a heretical tyranny occupying the throne of a rightful Catholic kingdom. This was not a political disagreement. It was a spiritual war. For a young man of action and fervent belief, there was little future in an England that sought to suppress everything he held sacred. His path, therefore, led him abroad. In his early 20s, Fawkes left England for the continent, seeking a cause that matched the fire in his soul. He found it in the Low Countries, amidst the bloody mire of the 80 Years' War. He enlisted in the army of Catholic Spain and fought for over a decade against the Protestant Dutch rebels and their English allies. It was here that the devout gentleman was hardened into a professional soldier. He learned the brutal arts of siege warfare, the logistics of military campaigns, and, crucially, the science of explosives. He was known not as a reckless mercenary, but as a man of great courage, piety, and technical proficiency. His comrades knew him by the Spanish version of his name, Guido. He rose through the ranks, earning a reputation for being reliable, brave, and utterly committed to the Catholic cause. He was, as one contemporary described him, a man of great piety, of exemplary life, and of a most temperate and patient carriage. He was not a fanatic in the sense of being wild or unhinged. He was a fanatic in the sense of possessing a focused, disciplined, and unshakable resolve. He believed so completely in his cause that he was willing to undertake any action, no matter how extreme, in its service. While Guido Fawkes was honing his military skills in Flanders, the situation for Catholics back in England was about to undergo a seismic shift. In 1603, Queen Elizabeth I, the great Protestant matriarch, died. The throne passed to her cousin, James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. For a fleeting moment, a fragile hope flickered within the Catholic community. James's mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, had been a Catholic martyr in their eyes, and his wife, Anne of Denmark, was known to have converted to Catholicism. Surely, they thought, this new king would usher in an era of greater tolerance. He had made vague promises to that effect before his accession. This hope, however, proved to be a cruel illusion. Once securely on the throne, James not only continued Elizabeth's anti-Catholic policies, but, in some ways, intensified them. He publicly declared his utter detestation of Catholicism and reimposed the collection of recusancy fines. For a small group of wealthy, desperate Catholic gentlemen, this was the final betrayal. The death of hope is a dangerous thing. It clears the ground for radicalism to take root. The sole and driving force of this radicalized faction was Robert Catesby. He was a charismatic, wealthy, and imposing figure, a man who possessed a magnetic personality and an iron will. Catesby had been involved in previous plots and had seen his family's fortune dwindle under the weight of recusancy fines. He had exhausted all peaceful avenues and had come to a terrible conclusion. If God would not deliver them from their persecution, then they must become God's instrument themselves. They would not plead for tolerance. They would seize it through an act of cataclysmic violence, so shocking it would shatter the Protestant state and pave the way for a Catholic restoration. Catesby began to gather a small circle of trusted co-conspirators, his cousin Thomas Wintour, the melancholic John Wright, and the hot-headed Thomas Percy. They were men of property and standing, driven to desperation. They swore an oath of secrecy on a prayer book in a London inn, and their plot began to take shape. But they lacked a crucial component. They were gentlemen, not soldiers. They needed a man with military expertise, an explosives expert who was not known to the English authorities, and someone whose commitment to the cause was absolute. Thomas Wintour was dispatched to Flanders to find such a man. He found Guido Fawkes. In April 1604, Fawkes and Wintour returned to England. Fawkes was introduced to Catesby and the others. Here was the man of action they had been seeking. He was not a leader in the same way as Catesby. He was the specialist, the technician, the quiet professional brought in to execute the most critical part of the plan. His role was defined from the outset. He would be responsible for procuring and managing the gunpowder and for lighting the fuse at the decisive moment. The plan itself was breathtaking in its audacity and its barbarity. They would blow up the Houses of Parliament during the state opening, an event that would bring together the entire Protestant ruling class in one place. King James I, his heir Prince Henry, the lords, the bishops, and the commons. It was to be a single, surgical strike of divine retribution, wiping out the entire heretical government at a stroke. In the ensuing chaos, they planned to kidnap the king's younger daughter, Princess Elizabeth, and install her on the throne as a puppet Catholic monarch. Fawkes, the soldier, would have seen the strategic logic. It was an act of total war, designed to decapitate the enemy and create a power vacuum they could exploit. He believed it was God's will, a terrible but necessary act to cleanse the nation and restore the true faith. To carry out their monstrous design, they needed proximity. Thomas Percy, a gentleman pensioner with connections at court, used his position to rent a small house adjacent to the House of Lords. Fawkes, using the alias John Johnson and posing as Percy's servant, took up residence. Their initial plan was to dig a mine from the cellar of their rented house under the foundations of the House of Lords. For months, these well-born gentlemen engaged in grueling, back-breaking labor, digging through earth and stone in the dark, their hands raw, their bodies aching. The work was slow, arduous, and fraught with peril. Every noise carried the risk of discovery. They lived in a state of constant, gnawing tension, sustained only by their fanatical belief in the righteousness of their mission. Their efforts were eventually rendered moot when they discovered an opportunity that was almost too good to be true. A cellar, a large undercroft, was available for rent directly beneath the House of Lords chamber itself. The space was perfect. It was dark, cavernous, and offered the ideal location to store their deadly payload. Posing as a merchant, Percy rented the cellar. Now, under the cover of darkness, the real work began. 36 barrels of gunpowder, an immense quantity totaling nearly 2.5 tons, were stealthily transported by boat up the Thames and moved into the undercroft. Fawkes the expert took charge. He carefully concealed the barrels beneath a pile of firewood and iron bars, the latter intended to act as shrapnel, maximizing the destructive force of the blast. The bomb was set. From that point on, their lives became a long, agonizing wait. Parliament's opening was repeatedly postponed from February to October, and then again to the 5th of November 1605. For more than a year, the conspiracy simmered. Fawkes spent long, solitary hours in that cold, damp cellar, guarding his monstrous creation. We can only imagine the psychological state of the man during those months. He was sitting on a secret that could tear the kingdom apart, a lone sentinel in the darkness beneath the feet of his enemies. His resolve never wavered. He was a soldier on duty, waiting for the signal to complete his mission. His world had shrunk to the confines of that cellar, the smell of damp stone and gunpowder his constant companions. As the date of the state opening finally approached, cracks began to appear in the conspirators' wall of secrecy. Several of them grew uneasy about the collateral damage. Their plan would kill not only their Protestant enemies, but also a number of Catholic peers who would be in attendance. Francis Tresham, a latecomer to the plot, was particularly concerned for the safety of his brother-in-law, the Catholic Lord Monteagle. On the 26th of October, just 10 days before the planned attack, a mysterious event occurred that would unravel everything. Lord Monteagle received an anonymous letter while at dinner. The letter was cryptic, urging him to devise some excuse to shift your attendance at this Parliament. For God and man have concurred to punish the wickedness of this time. It spoke of a terrible blow that would be struck without seeing who hurts them. Monteagle, whether out of genuine fear or a calculated act of self-preservation, immediately took the letter to the king's chief minister, Robert Cecil, the Earl of Salisbury. Cecil was a master of espionage, a cunning and ruthless politician who had inherited his father's vast network of spies. The existence of a Catholic plot was likely no great surprise to him. His agents were everywhere. The Monteagle letter, whether a genuine leak or a piece of carefully managed intelligence, gave him the perfect tool. He could now let the plot run almost to its conclusion, allowing him to catch the conspirators red-handed and expose the full extent of the Catholic threat in the most dramatic way possible. He would not just stop a conspiracy. He would turn it into a political spectacle that would serve the state for generations to come. The conspirators learned of the letter and were thrown into a panic. They suspected Tresham. Catesby, his charisma turning to reckless fury, wanted to kill him, but they were too close. Catesby made a fatal decision. He concluded the letter was too vague to be a genuine threat and decided to press on. He dispatched the one man he trusted above all others to stand his post, Guy Fawkes. Fawkes was sent back to the cellar, back to the gunpowder. He knew the risk. He knew they were likely walking into a trap. But his sense of duty, his soldier's discipline, and his unwavering faith compelled him to obey. He returned to the darkness, armed with a slow match and a watch, ready to die for his cause. In the late hours of November the 4th, the eve of the state opening, the authorities made their move. A search party, led by Sir Thomas Knivet, descended into the warren of cellars beneath Westminster. They found a tall, imposing man dressed in a cloak and hat, standing sentinel beside a large pile of firewood. He gave his name as John Johnson. He was calm, defiant. They searched him and found what they were looking for: slow matches and touchwood, the tools for ignition. Behind the firewood, they found the barrels. The plot was exposed. Fawkes was arrested on the spot. Even in capture, his spirit was unbroken. When asked by one of the lords what he had been planning to do, he replied without hesitation that his intent was to blow you Scotch beggars back to your native mountains. He was taken directly to the king. In the presence of James I, Fawkes remained unbowed. He expressed only regret that his plan had failed. The king, both terrified by the scale of the plot and morbidly fascinated by the man who was to execute it, personally began to question him. Fawkes admitted his own role, but refused to name his co-conspirators. He was a soldier, and he would not betray his comrades. But the king and his council had other methods. The law of England forbade the use of torture except by royal warrant. On November the 6th, James I issued that warrant. He sent a letter to the Tower of London, instructing the interrogators on the process. The gentler tortures are to be first used unto him. The king wrote, "Et sic per gradis ad tenditur," and so by degrees proceeding to the worst. If he remained stubborn, they were authorized to use the rack. Guy Fawkes was delivered into the hands of the state's professional tormentors. What happened next took place in the cold, echoing chambers of the White Tower, a place designed to break men. The process was not a single violent act, but a slow, methodical, and psychologically devastating campaign. It began with the gentler tortures, manacles, which would have held him in an agonizing stress position for hours, possibly days, restricting blood flow and causing excruciating pain in his joints. He would have been deprived of sleep, his body and mind weakened by exhaustion. Yet for days he held firm. His will, forged in the discipline of the battlefield and the fire of his faith, resisted. Robert Cecil and his interrogators grew impatient. The order was given to proceed. To the worst, Fawkes was taken to the rack. The rack was a simple but diabolical machine, a wooden frame with rollers at each end. The victim's wrists and ankles were fastened with ropes, and the rollers were slowly turned, stretching the body. The pain would have been indescribable. Ligaments would have torn, muscles ripped from bones, joints dislocated with sickening pops. The very frame of the man was being pulled apart. We do not know exactly how long he endured this, but we know its effect. The man who had faced the king with defiant pride was systematically reduced to a vessel of pure agony. His mind, starved of sleep and overwhelmed by pain, could no longer hold the line. His resolve shattered. His body, broken and useless, betrayed him. He began to talk. On the 9th of November, after perhaps 2 or 3 days of escalating torment, Guido Fawkes gave his full confession. He revealed his true identity and, one by one, named his fellow conspirators. The state now had what it wanted. While Fawkes was being broken in the tower, a frantic manhunt was underway for Catesby and the others. They had fled London, attempting to incite a Catholic uprising in the Midlands, but they found no support. The local populace, horrified by the news of the plot, turned against them. They were cornered at Holbesh House in Staffordshire, and in a final, desperate shootout with the sheriff's posse, Robert Catesby, the charismatic leader, was killed, clutching a picture of the Virgin Mary. The other survivors were rounded up and brought to London to face their fate. The trial, when it came in January 1606, was a foregone conclusion. It was not a process of justice, but a piece of political theater. The surviving conspirators, including a gaunt and broken Guy Fawkes who could barely walk, were paraded before the court at Westminster Hall. They were charged with high treason. Their guilt was undeniable. Fawkes's confession had sealed it. The Attorney General, Sir Edward Coke, delivered a venomous prosecution, painting the plot as a monstrous manifestation of Catholic evil. The sentence was inevitable: to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. This was the most extreme punishment in the English legal arsenal, a death designed to be the ultimate spectacle of terror and state power. The condemned man would be dragged through the streets to the place of execution, hanged until he was nearly unconscious, then cut down, disemboweled while still alive, his entrails burned before his eyes, and finally, his body hacked into 4 pieces and his head severed, to be displayed on spikes as a warning to all other would-be traitors. On January 31st, 1606, Guy Fawkes and 3 of his co-conspirators were brought to Old Palace Yard at Westminster, directly opposite the building they had intended to destroy. A large, jeering crowd had gathered, hungry for the bloody spectacle. One by one, the others went to their horrific deaths. Fawkes was the last. He was a ghost of the man he had once been. Weakened by torture, his body mangled, he had to be helped up the ladder to the gallows. He spoke briefly to the crowd, his voice likely weak, asking for forgiveness from the king and the state. But even in this final moment of degradation, a flicker of the old soldier remained. He was determined to deny his torturers their final, grotesque satisfaction. As the noose was placed around his neck before the hangman could release the cart, Fawkes leaped from the ladder. The sudden drop and the weight of his own broken body snapped his neck, killing him instantly. It was his last act of defiance. He had cheated the executioner of his sport, sparing himself the agony of being disemboweled alive. The sentence was still carried out on his corpse. His lifeless body was quartered, and the pieces were sent to the 4 corners of the kingdom to be displayed as a gruesome deterrent. The immediate aftermath of the plot was exactly what Robert Cecil had intended. A wave of anti-Catholic hysteria swept the country. New, harsher penal laws were passed, further oppressing the Catholic population and solidifying the Protestant identity of the nation. The Gunpowder Plot became the foundational myth of English anti-Catholicism for the next 3 centuries. The government orchestrated a brilliant propaganda campaign, commissioning an official account and establishing the 5th of November as a day of national thanksgiving, to be marked with sermons and bonfires. The burning of effigies of the Pope soon evolved into the burning of effigies of Guy Fawkes himself, cementing his place in the popular imagination as the ultimate villain, the faceless traitor in the cellar. The complex, devout, and tortured man was gone, replaced by a scarecrow stuffed with straw. History, however, is a contested space. While the official narrative of a purely Catholic plot became dogma, questions have always lingered. How much did Robert Cecil know, and when did he know it? Some historians have argued that the plot was, if not entirely fabricated, then certainly nurtured and allowed to develop by Cecil's intelligence network. Was the Monteagle letter a genuine betrayal, or was it a carefully staged event, designed by Cecil to reveal the plot at the most politically opportune moment? The truth is likely buried somewhere in the middle. The plot was real, the conspirators' intentions were deadly, but a master spymaster like Cecil almost certainly manipulated events to his and the state's maximum advantage. He did not invent the dagger, but he allowed it to be raised almost to the throat of the kingdom before he seized the hand that held it, ensuring the lesson would be all the more terrifying and all the more useful. The ultimate irony of Guy Fawkes' legacy lies in his modern reincarnation. The man who died for a vision of a reactionary, absolute Catholic monarchy has, in the 21st century, become a global symbol of anti-establishment rebellion, anarchism, and the fight against tyranny. This bizarre transformation is thanks largely to a graphic novel, V for Vendetta, and its subsequent film adaptation. The stylized, smiling Guy Fawkes mask has been adopted by protest movements from Occupy Wall Street to the hacker collective Anonymous. It has become a symbol of populist rage, of the anonymous individual standing against the faceless power of corporations and governments. The devout, conservative Catholic soldier has been hollowed out and repurposed as a mask for ideologies he would have found utterly abhorrent. His identity has been unmoored from his history, his faith forgotten, his true cause rendered irrelevant. So when the fireworks burst in the cold November air, what is it that we are truly remembering? We are not remembering the man. The real Guy Fawkes lies buried under 400 years of propaganda, caricature, and cultural appropriation. The historical figure was a product of his time, a man driven to extremism by persecution, a soldier who saw violence as a legitimate tool of faith, a zealot who was prepared to commit an act of unimaginable horror for what he believed was the greater good. His story is not a simple nursery rhyme of good versus evil. It is a grim and cautionary tale about the combustible nature of religious certainty when mixed with political desperation. It is a story about the power of the state, not only to defeat its enemies, but to rewrite their very identity, to break their bodies on the rack and then burn their effigies in celebration. The fire Guy Fawkes failed to light in 1605 was finally extinguished in the torture chamber of the Tower, but the bonfires lit in his name since have created a myth far more potent and far more enduring than the man himself could ever have been. The true tragedy is that the man, in all his flawed, fervent, and terrible humanity, has been utterly consumed by the flames.